I'll just say a couple of words in Danish to welcome you, and some in English. Vi er meget glade for her på Dokken at byde velkommen til det franske institut, som laver det her meget, meget flotte arrangement. Night of Ideas. La nuit des idées, siger de der. Og Idéernes Nat på dansk. Og i år er vi også meget begejstrede for, at de stiller skarp på et meget vigtigt emne for os alle. Noget, vi alle sammen er nødt til at forholde os til. Det digitale område og de udfordringer, der ligger i kampen om nettet. Det er også noget, vi er stærkt optaget af i bibliotekerne, som I jo også er i lige nu på Dokken. Så vi har en bunch of people her, meget dygtige mennesker, forskere, etiske hackere, iværksættere, som vil debattere de her områder. So, I would like to welcome you to Night of Ideas and to l'Institut Français. And now I'll give the word to Clarisse Girardin. Is it right? Okay. Welcome.
Tak, Britta. Thank you very much for the place here. We're very, very happy to be here. Thank you all for being here tonight. La Nuit des Idées, Idéernes Nat, is a yearly event by the Institut Français, a French institute in Denmark. And in 2022, we decided to dedicate it to digital issues. It was first because, well, there were first reasons is that France held the EU Council presidency, and you had some huge issues and work in process to agree a new regulation, of this issue in Brussels. And the second one is that you all know is that we have all noticed, particularly since the health crisis, and even more now with war in Ukraine, that those digital matters have taken a growing importance in our life. We have all experienced how heavily our lives today depend on digital technology for our work, our friends, our entertainment, for everyday life services. We cannot even imagine how we could live today without them anymore. And many of us were jumping, and sometimes with enthusiasm, in this new digital world. But have we taken time to measure its effects on us? Are we remaining the same? Are we going to remain the same in the future? Are we still the same citizens? Are we building the same society? So in this digital development, is this digital development sustainable in terms of resources, in terms of economic supply coming from abroad, in terms of fair competition, and preservation of economic possibilities for Europe, faced with the GAFAM in particular? In the recent months and weeks, the EU has reached agreements, the DSA, Digital Service Act, and the DMA, Digital Market Acts, which intend to address some of those major issues: data privacy, regulation, interoperability, fair competition. EU launched an ambitious program, and at least an ambitious one compared to what the situation currently is. We can be grateful for that to the effort of the Danish EU Commissioner, Margrethe Vestager, who had a crucial role in this, and even of some Danish European MPs like Christel Schaldemose, who also was instrumental in that. But yet, are those efforts enough? Certainly not. More broadly, can we have a common ambition for EU digital sovereignty? What would it mean? And today, what is the risk of our dependence for digital services technologies, as well as for raw material, which are necessary for our devices, and which are coming from Africa or China? And can we also ensure that a digital world can also be a sustainable one? So here are the many questions we'd like to discuss tonight. And I will now let the floor to our speakers, and first to Matthias. Thank you very much for moderating that, who will for this night. So warm welcome to you all, and God Idéernes Nat, bonne nuit des idées. Thank you.
Tak, j'ai déjà. Ja, Jeg siger lige et par ord på dansk, og derefter så fortsætter vi på engelsk. Velkommen til jer alle sammen til Idéernes Nat, som vi er meget glade for at kunne have organiseret. Det er jo l'Institut Français, som står for det i samarbejde med Doc1. Så tak fordi I vil komme. Vi skal snakke om suverænitet, digital suverænitet og modstandsdygtighed. Det er temaet for i aften. Om fremtidens digitale Europa. So, in English, we're going to be speaking about the fight for the internet, the fight for our digital lives, and what perhaps another kind of digital life can mean. We'll be speaking about the challenges of digitalization, about hacking, about digital sovereignty, what this can mean on a European scale. We'll be speaking about surveillance, we'll be speaking about business, and we'll be speaking about digital citizenry. Is digitalization a problem for the climate? Can Europe become its own master digitally as well? Which new lines of conflict and vulnerabilities become apparent in this digital era? And I'm very happy to be able to invite here onto stage the two first participants, because often when we speak about the digital, we speak about a world of numbers, but numbers that we don't really see. But of course, the digital, at the end of the day, is the human. And so I'd like to invite here onto the stage Christian, Ulrik Andersen, Antoine Mestrade. So please, if you would join me here. Antoine, you are the founder of the collective Hérétique, which is a kind of digital activist collective, also a business. You kind of, and I think this is true for many people, it seems, working in this area, the line between activism and business is not always very clear-cut. You've developed, you've worked beforehand in Google, for example. You've kind of seen this side of things, and then you decided to opt out, and you've created, notably, an app called Dérive, which in English would be something like walking around without any purpose, which is the exact opposite, in other words, of Google Maps. So we'll be speaking about this because this is a kind of another image of what the internet can be. And then Christian Ulrik Andersen, you are a lecturer at the Department of Digital Design at the university here in Aarhus. And you are notably the author of a new book that has come out that is called The Metaverse. And we'll be speaking about the role of digital art in the development of the digital. So first off, I wanted to ask you, Antoine, you started off working in these large companies who very much, does it work?
I don't know.
Yeah, it seems to work.
It works? Okay, cool.
You started off working in these large companies and then you dropped out, which can seem strange because for many people, the goal is to get in, work at these companies because it's these companies that are fastening our future. What made you leave?
Well, hello, hello first, hello everybody. I'm really glad to be there. So I worked for Google, but it was a really, really short period. It was like 2 months at the very beginning of my career. So as you said, I did business school and I was quite fascinated by those big tech companies because they are really selling the dream and they are supposed to be the most innovative and the most employee-friendly companies. So I just wanted to put a foot inside, but I didn't stay quite long. It was an internship at the really beginning, but I think I saw quite a lot of things that could be of like a threat. I was working in the marketing department, so I was not in the engineering part, which was quite interesting to see the monopoly and even the lobbying efforts because I was working with a lobbyist too. So at the really beginning, but I think most importantly it was the next experience when I was working in venture capital. I realized what which type of companies those big venture capitalists were funding. And actually, I worked for the French Public Investment Bank, so BPI France. It's like the sovereign fund, and this institution was financing companies that I deemed were not really responsible, be it regarding the competition law, labor law, fiscal law, etc. So I began to think there is something more deep to find. What is the model that is brought by those venture capitalists, by those big tech companies, and is it the only model, or can we find some alternatives? So that's why I didn't leave Google. I'm not like Tristan Harris, which is a famous designer from Google who left after years and say he's now challenging the model he contributed to implement. But I saw, and I wanted to see quite fast other things, other vision of the digital world.
And you have another kind of vision of the digital world. You've spoken about digital sobriety, as opposed to what?
Well, so when I left those two venture capital institutions, and I wanted first to know precisely with my associate, who is not here today, Kevin, what is the model, and more precisely the technical model, the strategic model, and the ideological model of those big tech companies before being able to define another model. So we delved into the beliefs of those big tech companies, those big tech entrepreneurs. What do they believe in? Who are their intellectual references? And so I could develop later, but I don't want to monopolize. But so what is really the ideology? And so we defined it with just 5 pillars to be able to manipulate it, saying they are obsessive, so they want to put digital technologies everywhere at the maximum level of performance. So they want to automate everything, to digitize everything. They are reductionist, so they only want to solve problems for consumers, bringing volume, bringing choice, and bringing efficiency. As it's the only thing, so we can consider it's a good thing to solve problems, but for us it's just it's a limited view of, if you see the world as a problem, maybe you're missing a lot of things. So they are reductionist, obsessive, extractive, so it's quite known, they're extracting our time, our attention, our data, our interactions. They are soilless, so it's they are not anchored in a territory or anchored in a culture or anchored in an epoch, a time. They view themselves are not bound to a territory or a culture, and so they develop the same product for 5 billion netizens or people that can access the internet. And lastly, they are imperialist, so they want to conquer the world, and they have no intention of respecting the law. They just want to promote their selfish interest. So that's mainly the 5 pillars we defined. And so it was not that hard after to say, if you do the opposite, maybe we'll have better common results, and maybe there's quite a lot of fields to explore.
Right. And a digital world that is not based on these 5 pillars that you've just mentioned, I guess that's a digital world that, for example, you see in some of the apps that you've been developing. Can you just say a few words on what these apps are about?
Okay. So the first app we developed, we launched it 1 year ago, and it's not available in Denmark yet because we don't have the ambition to conquer the world in 2 years, nor in 50. I think we have other issues. But so the first app we developed is called Derive. So it's a really small app, a navigation app that allows you to move throughout your city. But we built it because we consider Paris, I'm from Paris, and it's a really, really different city from Atlanta or San Francisco or New York. You don't have the same urban scheme. And so for us, it was not natural to use the same tool built for this city, made for cars, not made for the flâneur. So in French we have the word flâneur, which is this guy strolling around the country. There is no really English translation. I don't know in Denmark if
flâneur.
Flâneur, okay. So we wanted to build an app for the flâneur and not for the one going to work every morning and people who has to control and arrive on time. And so when we walk through Paris on the weekend, we don't necessarily want to know exactly it will take 15 minutes, and if it takes 16, it means you lost 1 minute. So basically that's the concept of the app. There is also a nice little feature called Dérive Surprise, which is you can send a link to someone, and this person will be guided to a place without knowing the address. So the idea is to bring surprise, which is exactly the opposite of what Google would do. Because if you see like Google Maps, for years and years they have been adding more information, so the itinerary of course, but the photo of the place, the ratings, the commentaries, etc. So it's like the previsibility of everything, and we want to do the opposite and to bring surprise, and so you can be surprised yourself and surprise your friends. And so if I take back this like Silicon Valley playbook, it's more or less the contrary. So we're not trying to solve a problem, we're trying to reinstate a practice, which is a flânerie. We're not aiming for 7 billion people using it 10 times a day. We want it's a use case when you have the time, and maybe it's not for everyone and not every single territory on Earth, and it's collective. So we're not raising plenty of money to extract your attention, your data. It's like a local digital business.
So Christian, I thought this was really interesting because Antoine is pointing his finger at something that usually we've kind of become used to not really think about, that technology can be ideological, that technology is not just something that's neutral, but makes us do certain things in a certain way. And this is something that you've worked with. When you hear Antoine describing these 5 pillars of Silicon Valley or this way of thinking, do you agree? Is that how you see it as well?
Yeah, I mean, you can phrase it in different ways, but I think I agree with you. Of course, a lot of the designs we see around what we sort of would label the digital have an origin in America, and I think very much in sort of the invention of the interface in the 80s. You'd see, for instance, if I'm old enough to remember when the first Macintosh was introduced, and there was a sort of introductory video by Ridley Scott, and you saw sort of a young athlete combating Big Brother, which was sort of the mainframe computing. I don't know if any of you remember this, but that's sort of an image of the sort of ideology of Silicon Valley, that this is a tool made for sort of user empowerment, as opposed to sort of Big Brother control. And secondly, you have sort of American individualism in it, and the second one you have is realism, that the tool must not get in the way to hinder anything for the user. So you have this sort of intense focus on the user, and this sort of American mentality of fulfilling one's own needs through a media that's supposedly we don't feel, we can just sort of think of it as an extension of our own will. And I think that's basically sort of a foundation on which a lot of Silicon Valley functions. Of course, it's not the only ideology of building technologies, as you also point to, but that's by far the most dominant one.
Are there different ones? Is there, as there is a Chinese politics and the politics of the EU and the politics of America, is there also a digital world of China, a digital ideology of Europe and so on?
Yes, of course. Yeah, of course. And I'm sure there are people here who know much more about this than I do, but of course the Chinese visions of artificial intelligence mean something different, because it originates in a different cultural context, also of communism and these things. And in Denmark, at the time, we were also building computers in Denmark. We had Piccoline and these things. And we thought of technology in quite different ways. I mean, there's here in Aarhus in particular, a very strong tradition of doing what we call participatory design. So when we introduced technologies to the workplace in the 80s, of course this changed the workplace considerably. Like some people in particular, I think in the newspaper industries, we remember the typographers were always on strike because technologies, when they were introduced, rendered them obsolete in one way or the other. So what the unions did was that they collaborated with a lot of, a group of researchers in how to develop technologies that would somehow not alienate the workers in the print industry. So that's a completely different take on the development of a technology, more based on sort of Scandinavian social democratic values of worker engagement. And of course, a thing like that is only possible in Scandinavia, where you have strong unions who can have an actual say in the implementation of the technology. So you have these sort of little pockets of other histories, and of course there are numerous examples of envisioning different ideological foundations of technologies than Silicon Valley's and the pillars you're talking about. And yeah.
And do you see these other models, or these histories, perhaps without futures, of the past? Do you see them still at work in, for example, the Digital Services Act, the way that Europe now is trying to apprehend these subjects? Or is it the American model that we import to Europe?
Well, to a large extent, of course, it's an American model we import, because when you ask, what is the digital? I mean, most of us do not associate it with the Piccoline from the 80s, right? We think of what I would call meta interfaces, these things that interfaces that somehow interface to a sort of incomprehensible, opaque network of things that connect. You use your device and you don't really know what's happening, because it sort of just collects a lot of data that's then exchanged with other devices, and suddenly you see an advertisement for something on one platform that you are using on another platform, and it's very opaque to us. So you have this sort of data and data capture as one level of the digital. And then you have the device itself, that computing when I was young was, very much, my personal computer, and now it's more or less like a media player. And then so there's a sort of an infrastructure around the digital. And thirdly, as you were also pointing to, both of you, that the digital is something that we also associate with a radical transformation of our daily lives. So when we say the digital, we think in different layers, I think, and each layer poses different problems to us. But of course, this sort of everyday life that we experience, I mean, it's exactly as you depicted, Antoine. I experience it the same way, that this sort of radical focus on me as a user, and trying to somehow, always trying to speak to my innermost desires that I didn't even know that I had. And that's of course because it knows me quite well based on the data and my whereabouts online. So
one of which is really true, both I think for some of your apps and also for your work in the middle ground between technology and art, is that in the digital world we live in now, we never know when we're playing and when we're working, in the sense that there's a gamification of our world, and sometimes we are the product, sometimes we are the workers. We never quite know. But art also is historically kind of a form of play, and you've been investigating how you've worked with what art can tell us about the internet. So what digital art can tell us about the digital, and what is this?
Yeah, it's a broad, good question, and of course, I believe that, like in any media technological transition, we have art to teach us about how we experience this world. I mean, we begin to see the world quite differently when it's datafied. You get a different perspective on the world, and art somehow is a domain that teach us or help us understand this. I think you can perhaps compare it to other sort of large changes, like you had the arrival of the train, for instance, and the building of suddenly you had trains and transportation. You started seeing a world that were in speed and movement, and of course that also affects the way painters and not least in the moving industries and authors describe the world. So I think art it's an area that helps us sort of understand the sort of radical perceptual changes that happens with new media technologies. Yours is also an example of this, and it doesn't necessarily need to be an exploration of the effects, but it can also be quite critical to do it. Is this really what we want, or can we envision it in different ways and things like that?
Yes, because exactly, Antoine, your app Dérive could as well be looked at as a kind of participatory artwork. There is this kind of there's this playfulness in it, and this desire not just to take the straight path, but to take perhaps the more human path. But is this kind of digital world that you envision with this app, is that condemned to just being on the side of things, or can that become a kind of counter model, do you think?
It's a deep question. I think it would challenge the economic model at large more than just the digital model, because Dérive would imply you have more time to work, you have more time to waste. Some people would say, I would say to live. But one of the things we don't want it to be just marginal. We want it to have its place and to live with a lot of other alternatives, because one of the main things we criticize today is the monopoly part. But so there are economic monopolies, but they are also the unique tools. When you go to Orange, when you go to Shanghai, you go to Dakar, to move you will use Google Maps. You will use Uber in Dakar. It's not so used yet. We've been there too. But you're using the same tools everywhere to do the same thing. So to meet someone, you use Tinder, and you don't really know. You have this American perspective on dating, for instance. And so we don't want Dérive to be the unique counter model, and we don't believe it will be. But we want 1,000 Dérive to emerge, and we want people in other cities, for instance, to think in which way my city is really different from Atlanta, for instance, the basic American city, in which way it is different, in which way I could move differently, which kind of emotion I want to provoke or to have when I'm moving inside the city. So that would be one way to answer. It won't have for instance, there is like Larry Page and Sergey Brin from Google always talk about their tools, saying they should be toothbrushes, so they should be used 3 times a day. So they won't develop or acquire a product if it's not a toothbrush product. And when you work in venture capital, when you're investing in B2C in products like for consumers, you want tools that are really regularly used. And with Dérive, it's not the case. Like, people use it twice a month when they have time, but it's not a problem for us. Like, our business model does not depend on no attention, no data, so it's not the main problem. So the use is not as large as Google, but if you have like 1,000 of use cases, maybe it will act as a counter model. And
perhaps this is the moment to bring in our other guests, if you would join us on the panel, because we have also tonight Brice Augras and Victor Poucheret. If you could just join us on the end side, perhaps, and Ophélie Coelho.
Do you want to shift?
There's whatever. We'll do a form of organized chaos, so it'll be a counter model. Counter model. And
let me.
Yes, and so Brice and Victor, you call yourselves hackers.
Yes. Hackers.
And what I'm sensing also coming from Antoine is that another kind of internet, another digital world, is a world where we don't just use the platforms that someone very far from us have made, but that we create our own platforms. And I know that this is something that you're quite interested in, the whole kind of participatory side, because hacking, well, what is hacking today? And why are you not in prison? Because a hacker is supposed to be in prison, I was taught when I was a child.
Well, first thing first, we are all hackers, but we are not criminals. And that's why we often put, the ethical in front of it, but it might be misunderstood, but we are not criminals, we are hackers. And what does hacking mean? If you go back to Shakespeare, it will be a thing related to, well, literally to hack, to split, but the real meaning behind it is pushing the limits, striving forward. And so hacking, in its original sense, means wanting to go over, wanting to take something and transform it in something really different, totally different. And the Embrace has a great analogy on
we have two examples to describe what the hacker mindset and spirit is, and it's not only related to technological or IT stuff. For instance, you have children at Christmas that receive a box of a famous brand of little bricks you're supposed to assemble and craft. I don't know if I have the right to say some brands or so. I stay very careful. But he received at Christmas his box, he opened it, he threw away the manual and start building something else that he's supposed to do. Another example would be dad going to a famous Swedish brand of economic furniture, and he buy two chairs in order to build sleeves for his children, because the shape and the texture of the furniture he's going to buy allows him to act the way he's crafting, building, and thinking outside of the box. So yes, today our job is ethical hacker in IT stuff, because internet is a place without any limits. The only limit is your creativity. So this is why there is a lot of hackers for this first reason, and due to historical reasons too. But,
and so concretely, ethical hacking, that can be you being hired by a company to see if you can find a way into their safety walls, or...
Yes, absolutely. Today we can say that we are getting paid to break stuff.
Yeah, that's nice.
Companies get in touch with us, or nowadays there is a topic that is named bug bounty, which is spreading quite fast in Europe. It's coming from from the US, and bug bounty is some platform that puts us ethical hackers in touch with companies that can be very small to GAFAM or so on. And these companies ask us to find vulnerabilities for them, and yes, indeed, we're getting paid for it now. This is quite new, because if you ask us 5 years ago when we were unemployed, if this could have been, if this could have become a day job, and how a passion can
become our daily lives.
Yes.
How we could transform this will to hack, to open new, to discover new things, and literally get inside companies. How do you transform that into a real job without getting behind the balls? Well, today we did it, and we are quite happy to share about it.
So you're some of the guys who are in the system, working within the systems, and so. We've kind of already touched upon this, but one of the problems in our digital era today is that so few of us understand what's going on. So I was saying, very few of us understand what's going on. How the daily life that we lead through technology, that is produced, fastened by technology, how it really works. What are the codes? What are the algorithms? So on and so forth. And I wanted to ask you, when you speak with people who have absolutely no knowledge, but who are still, in a sense, prisoners or products of this world, what is the number one thing that the rest of us don't understand about the way the world works?
That's
Knowing you're not philosophers.
That's an awesome question. When we try to explain how to get into hacking, what is hacking, how do you make your way, whether you have a high-end diploma, whether you don't have any education at all, the first thing we try to explain is that information is everywhere. You are the information, you swim into the information, and you drown into the information. And to better understand the world, the first key step that we learned throughout all these years, and it's first skill that is still useful to us today, is thinking how to formulate a question. If you can if you know and if you can specify what question you have in mind, then you will have the power to get the answer that you need or that you are seeking for. And these answers, well, basically for us, it allowed us to expand into, well, this other specialized hacking computer systems field. But it is not only, well, limited to this, well, computer field. It's open to makers, builders, people who just enjoy their daily lives and who are trying to, well, break the limits of what their mind might perceive as a limit. And so that's, well, maybe the real answer to the question is the information. To everyone, it seems obvious. It's like it's in front of us, but when you get used to something that's in front of you, you don't get to see the details. You use your applications, your web phones, your smartphones, your websites. You are becoming the information. And you have to grab it. You have to understand that it's all services that runs on something, on data.
Do you agree, please?
Yes. My point of view, and in addition to what Victor said, is we are living in a world where we are tending to expose ourselves even more every day. For instance, if I take a traditional teenager, he has a Facebook account, he has an Instagram account, he's sharing his day-to-day activities. If he starts growing, he starts crafting a LinkedIn account to find a job, interact with people, and so on. So the matter is that the longer we spend on the internet, the longer, as you were saying previously about being the product of using free services, we share data, we give data freely about us, about our habits. And the matter is that we use it because it's really convenient. But how it's working behind about the kind of the exposure inside the cyber risk context, inside a cyber attack context, people at the moment, and even the first one are the companies, don't realize how the malicious activities is keeping growing across the previous years. Every new year we keep saying, okay, I think this year was the worst one, next year will be better. This is a complete lie on ourselves. So people have to realize that this kind of habits, the products and services we use, we are exposing ourselves and our privacy even more every year. Even if today we have GAFAMs in the world that are providing this kind of services, even them are vulnerable, and we can hack them with a level of complexity that is not as hard as we could imagine, even if we are not on the cliché that we saw on the Hollywood movie about being able to enter in the nuclear plant in less than 2 minutes just by typing with 2 fingers on the keyboard. No, but even these companies are vulnerable. Maybe tomorrow, we don't know. We don't want to be too much pessimistic about this, but there is a real threat model that is evolving really fast. Why? Because they are doing this for money. Data is representing money from their criminal activities. They are earning money, and there are no kind of politics agreement to have to perform this kind of action as we do. We are doing it in a legal way. These guys are not doing it in a legal way. So it's like an unfair game between cyber criminals and hackers regarding the race to how cybersecurity has to be considered in the world.
So are you saying in a sense that I, as a user, when I go on the internet or I use an app, I have to think that everything I put in is potentially public?
In addition to the question that nowadays starting to be considered seriously, for instance, in Europe we have GDPR. I don't remember the full acronym in English, but it's like a regulation regarding how companies are supposed to treat personal data, healthcare data, and so on. People start being aware about these topics. But regarding the cybersecurity part, yes, we have to ask ourselves, and every citizen, every human has to think about this before putting data on the internet, because it's not only the product, it's not only the worker when he click on the I'm not a human I am a human, but sorry. Saying, okay, the red light is over there, the crosswalk is over there, and working for Google. But you also have nowadays to ask: is this company seriously considering cybersecurity risk? And if tomorrow my data gets sold, leaked, what this could imply?
And I noticed when I was communicating with you beforehand that a few of you used different email services than I would use, for example, and I think in this case I use Gmail, so I think as a lot of other people, or Hotmail or something like this. Ophélie, you used Proton Mail,
yes.
I saw. I had not really heard about it, but then I did some research. What is this, and why would you use it? Because it seems like the specialists, they know something, and from their knowledge means that they use the web differently than the rest of us do.
In fact, I have several accounts. I have ProtonMail, which is a Swiss company. I have also the eCloud, which is a eFoundation, a French company. It's also possible to have a mail. And you can also host your own email, in fact, if you want, also. So, in fact, there are a lot of possibilities outside the regular, in fact, what you all use normally as Gmail or Hotmail or something like this. It's just more convenient for people to use Gmail or Hotmail. But, in fact, today it's really easy to go to other email providers like ProtonMail or something like eCloud, for example. Maybe you have in Denmark some email providers, in fact, national email providers too. So I think it is really interesting, in fact, this subject about email, but it's not only that, it's about all data. When you use Drive or Cloud, in fact, and you put data on it, like personal photos or sometimes personal documents. In fact, you always have to think about where is it stored. Is it stored, in fact, in Europe, in US? And even if it's stored in Europe, if you use a US cloud provider, in fact, it's always, those technologies are really centralized. So it's never totally secured in a way. Of course, with hackers could always break also those technologies. All technologies could be broken. That's really an evidence. But in fact, what I'm focusing in, and I will just make a transition about this, is that we speak a lot about the individual layer, the individual scale. But in fact, those are big powers. Those are sometimes national powers, and those are big companies' powers, in fact.
Perhaps I can just use this occasion to formally introduce you as well, because the reason why you know so much about this is that you are a researcher in what we call the geopolitics of the digital, and specifically also the material world in the digital, because the fact of the matter is, of course, we talk of the cloud, but in fact the cloud is not really up there. It's it's under the oceans and on the ground.
Yes, in fact, cloud is a combination of several technologies. So you have the infrastructure, data centers, and in fact you have a big layer of software, of course, and that's where they are really. So US cloud providers are really good about this, that they understood, in fact, the advantage to have in the same place control on infrastructures and on software, and they made at the same time a platform. They made something really efficient and easy to use, in fact, using cloud provider. And this is something in Europe we have, in fact, company specialized in cloud. In France, we have good companies that are making good cloud services, for example, that we don't use enough, in fact. But those US companies and now a bit Chinese companies have big expansion strategies, in fact. They are really aggressive. And so they will work in several European countries or on infrastructures to build big data centers, for example. And they will work with telcos to link, in fact, their infrastructures with satellite constellation or 5G infrastructures too. They build submarine cables too. So we have, in fact, a really large scale try to expand in Europe and also a lot in Africa today, if you look at their expansion today. So it's about big powers, in fact. And citizen, of course, is one element in that, but it's also about the power of your nation and of your companies that are hugely dependent today on American companies, of course. And also, we could speak about Chinese dependencies, about raw materials, but it's another subject, in fact.
Okay, so Brice and Victor, when we're now speaking about the physical side of the digital, what are the new vulnerabilities that we see today? Where do you see that our societies as a whole are the most vulnerable? Because I mean now, from the democratic side, we've started, certain countries have started experimenting with digital voting. And of course, this potentially opens a Pandora's box. That might not be where you think the vulnerabilities are, but where do you see them?
Well, we have the perfect example for that regarding the voting systems. I think 1 year ago, the Swiss did completely open the source code, so basically all the instructions that allows the voting machine to work. They opened it to the public, and so everyone was able to go, see, and watch how well the voting system did indeed work behind the curtains. But they did also something else. They understood that, well, there was a huge impact on, well, digital voting. You're putting your voice as a citizen inside a box, and you don't know what happens there. And so they understood that if there was an attack, people could basically almost overthrow democracy, or that's some of the worst case scenarios. And so to make it more resilient to cyber attacks, of course they did all the process of security on their side from within, and they built a maturity level throughout the years, throughout the whole organization. But they did, in fact, call hackers from, well, pretty much the whole world through what we are calling the bug bounties programs, which are basically matching, well, companies with hackers and basically paying the hackers by the vulnerability. If you get a critical vulnerability, you would get a higher reward, and a lower one, well, a lower reward. And so they did open this bug bounty program to invite and incentivize, sorry, I don't know if it's the right word, but to push the hackers to go and find vulnerabilities we found within their voting systems. And it really shows, emphasizes the democratization of, well, the citizen as a hacker who has, well, some power, who wants to get involved within the security of all voting systems of, well, tomorrow's democracy. It can work and get paid for it. That's extraordinary, because it also completely changes the traditional dynamic between the security forces, les renseignements, what's the English word I'm looking for? Intelligence agencies, and then the citizenry. It kind of creates a different idea of citizenry also.
Yes. In France, we had an additional example as the first time at the beginning, at the half of the COVID. It was the French government asking hackers to test the security of the tools. They named the app in France Tous Anti-COVID, so all against COVID, about flashing our QR codes and storing our QR code about the vaccination process. And they firstly asked hackers to enhance the security of the product, meanwhile releasing it publicly with an open source approach. And this is quite new, since for the maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we had no kind of contact with the French government regarding public and citizen services, where we were invited or where we had the opportunity to give them technical data for free without any business or money purpose. It was only a citizen done with a citizen approach about saying, okay, you're releasing a product that you certainly, or you regarding the code inside of it, the code quality, you certainly pay it quite low. So you should enhance the security. And now time has changed regarding how the French government starts having a different approach, and that's quite good.
So there's a different repetition of public and private and all of this. I wanted to ask you, Ophelie, do you see this in geopolitical terms? There was briefly talk of, in view of the Russian war in Ukraine, that suddenly the question of the pipelines, the data pipelines, was brought to the center of attention, and the idea that these pipelines could be cut up or simply bombarded or something like this. How do you see? Do you agree with Brice and Victor in the sense that this is the most important vulnerability in the new digital area? Or how do you see it?
I think there are several vulnerabilities, of course. You could speak about submarine cables. This was really a huge issue, and we spoke a lot about this in France, about if Russians are cutting submarine cables, how it will be. In fact, we are really well connected with submarine cables in Europe, so it would be really in fact, unrealistic that Russian will cut all the cables and we won't have internet anymore, okay? And we won't have access to data centers in US, for example. So it's really something. So this would be a critical thing, but in fact we don't have one cable. We have something like in France 20, and we have also in Spain, and you have in Denmark too. So we have a lot of cables, in fact, for that. One vulnerability is also data centers, in fact, of course. So you can, of course, if you want to explode data centers, if you want to send a bomb on a data center, but in fact, we have copies of data in other data centers. So there is a kind of resiliency in this kind of industry that, of course, is known to be secure in a way that you will copy several times in different data centers. And then you have also the software vulnerability. Then you can also attack some branches in that part. So in fact, you have always to consider all the chains of dependencies, of technical dependencies, about this security and how to store data or how to cut access to data. But in fact, the actor, the player, which is really powerful about that, who is really powerful about this, is the technological owner and technological producer. This is the most powerful, in fact. You can have an enemy which will provoke cyber attacks, which will try to attack your system, of course. But in fact, if you are dependent on a nation or on a technical player, this actor is the most powerful, and it can cut you the access to data. It can cut the technology, in fact. So if your administration service, for example, is using some companies that is Chinese or US or Russian, or if you are just using Apple Pay or Google Pay as Russian citizens used during the war, in fact, Apple or Google can cut your system, and it's the same if you are hosting data in Chinese and your government is not agreeing with China on some subjects. They can cut the access to those data. It can be your company data. It can be your health data. It can be anything. In fact, if you don't know where are hosted your data, you can always have this risk. In fact, they cut you the access to it. So it concerns everything. In fact, you can cut it physically. So you go with your submarine boat and you cut the submarine cable. You can also destroy satellites. In fact, this is also a risk. With satellite constellations, in fact, they are also really weak because it costs a lot of money to send satellites, but you can also destroy them during a war, or just saying it was an accident. Sometimes they use this term between US and China. So they say, okay, we destroyed your satellite, but it was not voluntary. Okay, of course. So it's kind of it's always a war, in fact, between material facts and digital links that you, as a user, you don't see, but are really critical, in fact, links and dependencies.
And there's quite a lot of work put into not making us see it also in terms of the metaphors, the cloud, etc. Everything is very immaterial, but really in the real world everything is of course material.
Yes, in fact, the vocabulary, the terms we're using are really erasing. In fact,
fallacious.
Yes, the material part, and that is a big issue, even for the European regulation. We will speak more about this, I think, later. That in fact, regulators don't have access nor to the code nor to the infrastructures, and what they can just control, and in fact to enforce the law, is what they see in the screen, as you and me. So, in fact, they just believe the interface. And they can't go, as you can go, for example, control a factory, you go on-site, and you will see how workers are working, and you will see the tools and security management and all that. But if you can't go inside the product, inside the code, inside the links, digital links that you don't see as a user, you can't control the law, in fact, the enforcement of the law. So that is a link between
This was something that I noticed. You gave an interview today to the paper Politik, and you said we can control what's on the screen, but we can't see what's behind it, as you just said now. And this is a big European problem.
Yes. Yes, that's it. They try to. Can I say something more about this? Yes. They try in the Digital Services Act. In fact, the recent one.
Which is just. Can you just put 2 words on it, just to explain to everyone what this is about?
Digital Services Act is with the Digital Market Act, a new regulation, European regulation, which try to protect, in fact, European interest. So it's something more than to protect data. It's also a kind of antitrust policy, in fact, regarding services and marketing. So, and there is in Digital Services Act 2 articles really interesting, the 54 and 57, which would be for the regulator, for the European regulator, to go on-site. So it means that the European regulator, with some experts, some technical experts, could go in California or in New York or in Virginia, North Virginia, go on-site and look at the infrastructure and the code. Okay? But this is on the paper. In reality, do we have the power, do we have, in fact, weapons of negotiation to force those US companies to welcome our regulators? It's not, for me, it's not the case.
So this is the question of sovereignty, which we'll get into a bit later. But I just wanted to ask you, Christian and Antoine, I remember Jack Dorsey, who's the founder of Twitter, which has now been sold to the richest man on Earth?
I think the universe.
In the universe, surely.
Is it still, because Tesla's stock plummeted, so...
And now it's going down.
I don't know if it's number 1.
What do you know?
We'll see tomorrow.
But Jack Dorsey, I don't know what he's doing now. He's probably sitting on some private island in the Caribbean. Jack Dorsey once said, when I was a child, I was thinking, should I become a politician? That seems nice. It also seems like it's a bit of work, and there's a lot of bad press. It takes a lot of time to change things. Or should I make an algorithm? I think I have to make an algorithm, because if I make an algorithm, they'll have to chase me and not the other way around. And so his point, of course, was that technology changes our lives and politics is always one step behind. And technology changes politics for the same reason. How do you two see it? Is it this? Are we doomed to be regulatorily behind always? At the mercy of these large corporations?
I don't know if we can answer this. I think you probably know more about it than we do, but at least it seems like it, right? I mean, it does seem as if it's a steep hill to climb, as you're talking about, to actually enforce regulation. But of course, I think that, from my point of view, without being an expert, I think we're doing a fairly decent job in Europe. I mean, I think that a lot of my American colleagues look at envy towards Europe and the things that we are trying to do here with GDPR, etc., and other acts. So, yes, but it's also, as you say, it's also what politics is, right? But we are also faced with we were talking ideology before, we are also faced with different paradigms here, sort of at a more abstract level. A lot of Silicon Valley is built on this idea of openness and open development. This idea that we do not try to direct the development in a particular direction, but we firmly believe that the open competition will create the best possible world. And these sort of ideologies, of course, came into being in the aftermath of, Nazism and communism, and there was a sort of a strong incentive to think of openness as an alternative to something more directed and regulated. So, and I think this sort of whole idea of non-regulation is extremely strong and a difficult thing to handle.
But perhaps also getting to the end of the line of a certain kind of non-regulation. And Swan, it seemed, I was looking at you, and it seemed like you wanted to add something on this subject.
Yes, but first I think Jack Dorsey is also the CEO of Square, so he has another big business to deal with.
Jack Dorsey?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
He founded another big unicorn. Now, first, I would say that for me it's not an issue that politics is lagging behind or late. It's just another rhythm, and we don't have to mimic technology, the rhythm of technology. We could say that finance, for instance, with ultra fast trading, is another rhythm, and we don't have to take decisions based on the millisecond. So politics is one rhythm, and I think this vocabulary of always urgency, being late, is quite bad. For instance, in France, in Europe in general, we always say regarding tech competition, we are running late from the US and from China. We have to invest really fast, to take decisions really quick. But honestly, we are running late, but in which direction are they going? Like, do we want to build a surveillance capitalist companies? Do we want to build a surveillance state? So I think it's a good thing that we are not in advance in this direction, first. And second, regulation, politics, it's another pace. And we've seen with, first, there is an ethos in Silicon Valley to move fast and break things, to bypass the law. So they are not just faster; they are just doing illegal things. So it's not politics is not late; they are just pirates in this case. So I'm talking about fiscal law, labor law, competition law, dumping, regulatory capture, etc. And second thing is we've seen some laws were not edicted yet, for instance with data privacy, or were not adapted, and so European regulators took time. There was quite a lot of lobbying behind the curtains too, but they finished putting a regulation in place, and now those companies have to adapt. And so even if we had maybe a little lag of maybe 1 decade, in the end, there is this regulation. They have to adapt. So I don't think we have to compare politics and technology. Even if you've got a lot of for entrepreneurs, or some would say visionaries, but I would not really agree. But in Silicon Valley, such as Peter Thiel, who is I don't know if you know, everyone knows Peter Thiel or no? He's like he was the founder of PayPal, with co-founder with Elon Musk. And he is the founder of Palantir, which is a surveillance tool used by the NSA, by French intelligence too. And he's also one of the main venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. So he's like a really, really powerful man. He was the first board member on Facebook. He was the only politician to support Trump in Silicon Valley. So it's a really, really, really important man. And he said some years ago, that technology and freedom and democracy were in a race, and technology was he said that he didn't know what would win between technology and democracy, but he would favor technology. So they are doing politics too, favoring this mentality of thinking it's just technology.
But in a sense, that runs counter to another very dominant ideology, which is the idea that more technology means more democracy, which we saw at work, for example, during the Arab Spring, where there was this idea that the Arab Spring, at least that was often the reading from the West, that the reason why there were all of these things going on was because of Facebook, was because of Twitter. You're not nodding your head.
No, but I don't. I think it's a myth. It's a sort of reconstruction. And what you saw was, what the sort of these so-called Twitter revolutions were criticized of was that they were producing sort of socially weak ties, that they were not in the end very powerful and didn't change much. I do think that somehow we have moved beyond that, and we have other sort of democratic movements on the internet that the sort of Black Lives Matters and Me Too and things like that. But at that time, I think it was sort of at least it has been criticized for not really making that revolution. I mean, because you had very weak social ties in the community.
How do you see it, Brice and Victor? Do you believe still in this? In many ways, the basis, I guess, of the original liberatory idea of the internet, which was more liberty and freedom for all through technology, that we could expose ill practices, we could find a different place of freedom within the internet, where we were not surveilled by the state, etc., etc. Is this still? Do you still think that ideal holds true?
Yeah, it's an ideal. It's an ideal. We all would like to strive toward this ideal, to more or less extent, and I think we might have the missing link. We spoke about technology, we spoke about politics, we spoke about the group, but now let's take it back to the individual. And the missing link is education. Back in 10 years, 15 years ago, when you had the first massive scandals about global surveillance, about everything that was leaked regarding, undercover operations, how American citizens were spied on, how European citizens were spied on, they started, opening the eyes of the public.
The Snowden...
The Snowden affairs, Julian Assange, all these stories. It started opening the eyes of the public on, what was going on behind the curtains. And so people starting to get interested. People starting to open their mind and trying to appropriate themselves the topic matter. And if you try to get it more on an even more global scale, the final topic to us, I think the missing link is the education of everyone. Not education in the scholarship way, because I think we are two examples of how we dropped out of the classic scholar system, and how by empowering the individual and allowing the individual to take back the control of its own willingness to learn and to get to discover new things, you might get new paths, new careers, new hobbies that will get you in the end, one way or another, working with technology, understanding what is behind the curtain, what is around all the topics revolving around surveillance, politics, and so on. And Gracie, you have so much to say.
To treat mentally. I just want to add a quick note about the fact that regulators and politics were late regarding what you were previously speaking. We had some case study, use case, about facing this kind of situation in France with our politics regarding the cyber situation. For instance, at the beginning of the COVID, we were working with the hospitals, public hospitals, because they were facing a massive increase of cyber attacks, because cyber criminals, unfortunately, were opportunistic, and using this kind of health situation, knowing that health practitioners were focused on taking care of of people that.
So suddenly there was a lot of data and no one was protecting it, really.
In less than 15 days, there was something like at least 13% of attacks trials against hospitals. In addition to this, we had the French president saying, okay, you have something like 3 days during the weekend to all switch working remotely without going back to the office. So just focus on allowing your employees to work remotely.
And I remember at this point, well, I was living in France, and a hospital, I think, was shut down or ransomwared.
Nowadays, hospitals hit by ransomware, we have at least one case. We should have something like one public case per month, an official case of hospital and institute, public institute hit by ransomware. We have.
So these are essential
like
operations.
Cases a day, no specific to a field of activity.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So everyone is indeed hit, but between the public data and the unofficial data, we observe, we take note during performing what we call response incident, is when you go to seeing an actor or a company that is getting hit. Yes, the numbers that are public are wrong for sure,
right.
200%.
So this is also because you work behind the scenes and you know for a fact that what we see, that there are a lot more ransomware operations going on, hitting really the vital networks of our societies without us knowing it.
There is an increase, yes, indeed. The second topic is regulators and politics are true. When we are considering the GDPR in its entirety, plus regulators in France, it's called ANSSI, which is the National Agency of Cybersecurity for Companies, which is some kind of regulators. It starts developing from 2017. GDPR was in 2018, but however, there still lack some individuals that can help companies, and they are just at the beginning of punishing companies for not disclosing what they are receiving and fighting regarding the cyber attacks, because it's considered as a fail, as a shame.
Yeah.
So there is no transparency.
And I guess a business secret that can make stocks plunge.
Yes, it's like. But yeah, so at the beginning of the COVID regulators, we got in touch about the hospital situation with ANSSI, describing how they were struggling, and we had no help about having means and resources to fight this kind of situation and contribute to their enhancement about the cybersecurity exposure. And the response and the counter-offensive we developed at the moment was the citizen approach, saying, okay, in France we have 50 hackers available at the moment, with I don't know if the English word works, but with a pro bono approach, working for free, not requesting money, just to with a democratic approach and a citizen approach, enhance their security for free, because no one else was, politics or government was giving us any kind of
means to do
approval too. We did not have any legal situation to perform this kind of action, but we did it because it was for a good reason and to help them, because this was not their priority at the moment.
Ophélie, how do you see this problem of regulation versus the running on, or I don't know which metaphor I should use, Antoine, of technology? Is it? Do you see it from the political side? Is it possible for regulation to take place efficiently?
Yes, I think, but it means that you, in fact, it means that you are a producer too.
A what?
That you are a producer of technology, that you own technology too. In fact, and that you support your own technologies. We have countries that are really supporting their own technical actors, and we don't really do this in Europe. And in fact, it's also because, for example, you spoke about the lack of resources during crisis, and in fact, it shouldn't be the role of of citizens just giving their free times to protect the society. In fact, this should be the state to pay to have its own, in fact, team, security team in those occasions. And it is also about our liberal politics, in fact, that are going to make to weaken, in fact, our nations. That is something we are seeing since 80s, 70s, 80s, and it is going on. And in the technical, in the technological field, this translates by, of course, a lack of resources, human resources and financial resources, when we have to create our own technologies and to have our own developers and hackers to protect the society, in fact. So in fact, we have to change our way of mind, our way of thinking about those subjects, and to invest on long term, of course, and to have a plan. Sorry about the term of planification. I'm really sorry about this, but planification sometimes is good for this.
You don't like the word, or why do you laugh?
That's perfect. That's perfect.
Okay.
We have to say this sometimes, no, on some parts, and sorry if I shock some persons too, but I think we could also sometimes think in Europe and in nation and in Europe level, in European level, we could speak about targeted protectionism sometimes on some parts.
What do you mean when you say targeted protection?
To support our players, in fact, to support our technical players, to support also our administrations.
So it's such an interesting point, because we've convened that states need armies, states need police,
yes,
states need fire departments, but states apparently don't need the infrastructure.
And they need it.
These can be owned by the private sector.
They need infrastructures, they need technologies, and in fact, when we look at other countries, other powerful countries, they support those subjects. But we are the only one, in fact, that are not doing it. So
we'll get into this question. I mean, there's so much to talk about. We'll get into this question of sovereignty after the pause. We'll have a brief pause of half an hour. We're ready? Good. So in the pause, I was speaking to one of the members of the audience, and he evoked the question of art and the digital. And so, Christian, this was something that it's made me think of perhaps one of the problems that we have, apart from the fact that many of us have no expert knowledge on algorithms or all of the mathematics and statistics that are behind all of these applications. But there's perhaps also another problem, which is that we have a difficulty in imagining the digital. And art is kind of our way we have as human beings of creating images, and through these images understanding our reality. And I was thinking, how is the digital world produced or represented in art? And the first image that came to my mind was The Matrix, of course. And we're always coming back to this, I feel, during this conversation, the questions of metaphors, and which metaphors do we use, which images do we use to understand our world. Can you speak to this in terms of some artworks that you feel expertly represent this part of reality?
Yeah, I mean, the digital is predominantly blue. You just make a Google search. It has been for many years. I don't know if it's changed colors.
And the Metaverse is purple.
It's purple in the Metaverse. Okay. Yeah. No, but I think, artists work with the digital in different ways. I mean, I was trying to sort of single out how we experience the digital or what is digital as the realm of data and the realm of infrastructures and devices, and then there's also the realm of our everyday lives. And I think artists work on these three levels in different ways because they raise different issues. We were discussing the issue of privacy and security at the level of data, and also at the level of infrastructures, how our technologies are designed so that we forget that there is such a thing as an infrastructure that delivers these services to us, and also our lives. And I think artists work on all three levels. If I can think of one artist, one of my favorite artists, Ben Grosser, addresses very much sort of this level, and these levels I was talking about are of course always connected, right? I mean, you wouldn't have that change of our everyday life if it wasn't for this sort of massive data capture, for instance. So, but what he does is sort of realizing that our technologies to a large extent function as a black box. So you do not know what's in the box. It's very difficult as a user to read this, but you can always test the box. So one example that he does with his art students is he asks them to, for a whole week, register whenever social media in particular wants them to do a particular thing or addresses them in a particular way. We experience this all the time, that why don't you post a video on this on
notifications?
Instagram? Notifications, the feed runs because you constantly checks it and you looks at it, and it's always registered what you look at, and that affects the feed. So he asked his student to, for a whole week, register this, and then he says, okay, next step is, now you've done this, what can you do to change this? What can you do to alter this in order to imagine a different reality, a different social media? So one of the things that he did fairly recently was created a whole new social media website called Minus. So Minus is a social media platform where you have only 100 posts. And it doesn't count anything. We're so used to having counters on everything that whenever you I bought a ticket for an airplane today, and it told me, only 3 seats left. You're constantly, these sort of patterns are constantly enforced on you. So he removes all that and creates a social media site.
So when you've posted 99 things on your cat and
then it's gone.
The weather, then you have only one left.
Yeah.
And then you really have to make it count.
That's it.
Okay.
And that totally changes the dynamics of interactions. So he does things like that, and so it's art that also is actually functioning software. As an example of one of my favorite artists, and it really makes you wonder of, I'm sure he's not going to get very rich. It's not a huge innovation like Antoine was also mentioning this before, but it's a different way of envisioning a reality, an online reality.
You wanted to add something, Antoine?
I'm not going to get rich too. Ben Grosser is a really interesting artist, and he has a lot of good ideas. One, just you were talking about metrics. He developed like a small plugin some years ago called the Demetrificator. So it's just an extension you have on your browser, and it removes any metric on Twitter or on Facebook, so you don't have the number of retweets, number of likes, number of views. So it's quite an interesting plugin, and you view, for instance, your feed really differently, because you are the only judge to know if it's popular, if it's interesting. You can't see what other people how they reacted. And you were talking about what kind of metaphor can we use to describe like the digital world, and in particular with non-technical people. So we had this question some years ago too, because we teach at Sciences Po, and they are not technical people, and neither are we.
Sciences Po, which is a school in Paris,
like
university in Paris,
of political science in Paris, and so they're not technical people. And my co-founder is, but I'm not. So we were like, how can we talk about algorithms to people who are not really in tech? And so we began to draw a world, like to imagine a world that we later called Algoville or Algo City. It's like the world inside your smartphone, and we began to design all the algorithms to personify the algorithms. So I've never translated the name of all the characters in English, so I don't know if it will work, but we were like, what is the Facebook algorithm doing? So they are promoting the most recent content. So there is like a Mr. or an algo hype that exists in this world. But they are also personalizing. So there is like this, we draw a little cocoon, it's like algo cocoon, which is personalizing. But they are also putting advertising. So there is like Mr. Ad. In French, it's Mr. Pourri. So he's just trying to sell you whatever he can. And he's talking with Mr. Algo Cocoon to personalize the advertising you receive. And so, in the end, we draw a big world, and hopefully it will end up in a cartoon in some years, but to describe all the mechanisms. And now we can just say, for instance, in Google Maps, you have an algorithm called Mr. Speed, and he just gives you the fastest route. So when you ask Google Maps, you only have this guy. When in Derry, for instance, the app we built, you don't have this guy. You have, for instance, Mr. Flanner or Mr. Lazy, who just tells you it's over there, and you manage. And you don't have like this guy trying to measure and to put metrics on everything. And so there's like a lot of way to view this world. In the end, there is this metaphor, which was just educational at the beginning, raises a lot of questions. For instance, and I'll end with this. But for instance, we had talked with actors in Senegal, asking us how could we define like a Senegalese digital world? How is it different? What are the particularities? And we were like, well, we don't know. But what we know is that so far, this algo city is the same everywhere. But so what are your cultural particularities, and how could it be reflected in this algo city? So it's like quite meta. But for instance, they told us that they were much more a culture of orality than of writing. And so how could it be reflected on the city? So for instance, in the end, in the Senegalese city, you had like a big micro tree that you don't have in Silicon Valley, for instance. So it's, I don't have the illustration, but there is a website that I can depend, but I really believe in the potential of metaphor to create new narratives or to invent new worlds and new services in the end.
How do you to see it, Brice and Victor? When you are hacking, doing your hacking, yes. It's a certain experience of the world that you have when you're hacking. It's you have a certain experience of time and space and the way that they hang together. You certainly do, because we have a certain experience of that now. And I was wondering, what kind of artworks then, or what films or books do you think reflects that experience that you have of how things work when you are in the matrix, so to speak?
Okay, then we are going to open the Pandora box
about
NCIS. We grew up at Friday night in France, watching two people typing on the same time, hacking all over the planet. Typing
on the same keyboard.
On the same keyboard. There were two people typing on the same keyboard and hacking all over the planet.
This is a TV show.
Yeah, this is a TV show. But no, the most, I won't say pertinent one, but the most precise one, the most relevant. This is another paradox and cliché, but we can talk about Mr. Robot, a famous TV show.
Right.
Unfortunately, the technical stuff in the TV show is very precise.
Which is, just to say, it's a TV show about a hacker living in New York, I think.
Yes,
like
absolutely. The technical content is very precise. The most relevant one from all over the movie we watched in the past. But unfortunately, the main character, which is supposed to be a hacker, is indeed wearing a hoodie like us, but is also
a schizophrenic and a drug addict.
Like you.
No. So that's the first point. Our main goal about wearing hoodie is just because it's comfy. Yeah, it's not about bringing or showing some kind of dark side, but. So Mr. Robot would be one of the content that is the most relevant, but even in this case, unfortunately, it's a lot of cliché for us, and the kind of message that is broadcasted, and against the one we are fighting days and days, to have, we hope one day, the feeling about opening a newspaper and seeing a difference between hackers and cyber criminals. This is not the same.
Well, Felia, I was wondering, you just before the break, you were saying we're living in this paradigm, which is an American Silicon Valley-based paradigm of a certain idea of freedom, and perhaps also, as Antoine was speaking to, a notion of no borders. The same kind of interface works for everyone. There's one world culture. The internet will stop dividing us and give us the possibilities to speak to each other all the time on the same kind of basis. This paradigm, is that reaching an end? So we know that the first idea of the internet was freedom, and what, to a large extent, we've gotten is surveillance, for example. So is there the end of one paradigm and perhaps the beginning of a new one?
So technologies are what we are making as human beings. In fact, we can do anything you want with a tool, and it's the same for digital tools. You can do what you want with that. You can do great things as you can do terrorism or crimes or things like this. So in fact, you have always to separate the dream of the reality, of course. But I wanted also to go back to this idea of metaphor, which has a lot to do with that, in fact, ideologically, with freedom, and also the idea that, for example, there is a kind of magic in digital. On the contrary of Antoine, when I give courses in university, I spend something like the third, or something like half of the time, in fact, in the transmission of technical knowledges. In fact, I work several years as a front-end developer. So I know how to code on some languages, and that helped me a lot 10 years ago to understand also what is digital and what is the relationship between software and infrastructures. And so when I give courses, I really want to give to not transfer metaphor, but the reality. So really, what it is to code, how to read a line. In fact, they will not learn how to code with me, but I will translate for them, and I will try to put the different layers and relation between material infrastructures and what they are seeing in their screen. So it takes sometimes half of the time, but in fact, the other half is really quick because we have already understood a lot of things. So this is about to put out the digital from this ideological and metaphorical world that is digital, and that takes place, in fact, in the 70s with the cyberculture, where the web, the internet, was the land of freedom, the freedom of speech, mixing with the freedom to be whatever you want, with a blue avatar, taking a false name. And this is, in fact, something we have to take distance with, and really to teach basic technical knowledge, not to understand, to learn how to code. We don't have to learn how to code on every languages, but know a little bit of native language, like, for example, C or even Perl, or even you can do some PHP if you want to put your hands in that. Anyway, but in fact, you don't have to know how to code, but you have to know the different layers and how to an algorithm, in fact, can become a machine learning model, for example, and what we call, for example, artificial intelligence, what it means really. Is it really an intelligence, or is it something that we can just automate? Is it something with just taking pictures, mixing them, classify them? Is it something based on language? There are a lot of artificial intelligence. So for me, it's really about technical knowledge, and this is linked with what you said before about education. Of course, we have a lot of efforts to do about technical education. And I think all of us, in fact, on the digital field, we had a line in our education, and we stepped out of this line, of this traditional line, of this education line. We had our studies, and then we learned by ourselves in companies or just by ourselves in front of our screen, in fact. So today, in fact, sorry for always using, in fact, that today we really need citizens to be aware about technical knowledge. Yes.
Can I ask you, Victor, please, when you teach, so you go out to schools, different places, and you teach, I guess, young people, perhaps also older people. What is the most important thing that you teach them that you think that the reason why you've made this collective? What do you want to pass on?
Well, I might be redundant, because when we first started, on the first part, we put a lot of emphasis on, information is key and how to formulate and search for an answer. So if I can elaborate a bit more, so yeah, first part is knowing that information is everywhere and you just have to just have to grab it, and to grab it you have to know how to formulate your question, and then you will find the answer. That sometimes is not enough. Sometimes you don't find the information on the web. Sometimes you have to walk your own path, and that's exactly what you said. You've got your line, you got your answers in front of you, but your question is just a bit behind. And you know that, you will have to walk this path alone. Nobody is going to take your hand and go through the door with you. It's these steps that will define you as an individual and as a hacker that you will be. It's these steps that you will do alone, that you will perform these extra steps to go and find information and to prove yourself that you can do it, that it's a word that you tried harder, that you wanted to find the information and the answer to all of your questions. And it's like all 42 of the ultimate answer to a life, universe, and everything. Is you just have to find your way and go for it. How do I start hacking? Open a web browser. I don't know this. Open a web browser. I don't know this. Open a web browser and go talk to people. And that's maybe the most important thing which we're trying to pass.
But on our side, we'll still have to improve our capitalization process regarding very specific knowledge, very precise topics, because we need to make the information with a very simple approach reachable by anyone. This is one of our mission, and this is why we apply every day with students, with my parents. The first time I had to explain what I was doing, 70 hours per day in front of my computer was about hacking. They were seeing me like an alien. But we need to make the information and explain in a very reachable way and accessible way with simple words. And using metaphor is indeed an approach to explain a very complex topic. But as Ophélie mentioned, there is a point where technology is evolving so fast. Even on our side, as tech guys, we struggle not being at the top, but keeping learning since the technology is growing in every topic. Today we are talking about artificial intelligence, big data, sovereignty, managed services, and all the funny stuff. It's very hard to be up to date on each topic. So sharing is caring mantra is one of our perception of I don't know, I don't have the time to learn, but sharing with the others, with others, will allow me to explain them and sum up the information in a quick and simple manner. And on the topics I don't, I'm not skilled on, they will be able to do the opposite for me and help me to learn because technology is fast. You are an expert or master on a specific topic at what moment? Maybe 5 years later, if you don't keep practicing, if you don't keep learning, unfortunately, you're out of date.
I remember last year I was participating with a school class here in Denmark at the gymnasium. They had some people coming through from the IT university to teach them about cookies and going on the internet and so on. And they were asked, so what do you do when you're faced with a cookie? What do you do? And I think it was something 95% just pressed accept all cookies. And obviously it's an advance now that we can choose, and that's part of the European regulation. It's easier to choose in any case. But when they were asked, why do you then choose all these cookies? They said, because the button is green. And this was 95% of the people. And this, to me, really showed the deep challenge in all of this, which is a question of information, of knowledge, of knowing what you say yes to, and then also perhaps, I suppose the question that I want to ask some of you experts is that why have we chosen this route? Is it because of business interests, or is it because we think democratically it's better?
You answered the question.
When you asked earlier about the internet, the ideal, the utopia of freedom, and why is it still a standing, ideal and something that we would like to reach? One of the answers is also the money flows. The business brings money, money brings growth, and growth brings new opportunities. That's a good way. If we are only optimistic, great. The world is going to change for the best. But when you bring in economic interests, then you fundamentally change the way that you perceive a tool or a procedure or something, or just something that is existent. So once you bring in money, for example, I as a company, why would I brand? Why would I spend money on something that doesn't match either my political agenda, either my values, or either my marketing? So you put in money in something, and in very pessimistic scenario, you're going to start corrupting it slowly because it has to match business interest. And for example, we can take and apply this example to the hacking culture. Initially, the hacking culture is kind of pure, we are trying to share and advance together, but from the point when you start bringing in some money, you start growing people's ego, people's greed. People are going to get more money, more fame, and they are going to try to expand and keep their secrets.
Yes.
When you have less money, whatever, we're all going in the same way. But when you add money, you have this competition. You have this will to dominate, to overthrow the other. But if you only take the bad parts, you will start going through directly an anti-capitalistic way of perceiving things, saying, okay, the flow of money is bad. But no, without money, you don't have you don't have the bones, the structure to go further and search further. If we can do research.
Can I just ask you then, perhaps some of you others, can one imagine an internet, for example, that is an internet of choice? That is, for example, there are no cookies unless you actively choose them. Is this impossible, or is this just we've chosen that it shouldn't be so? Christian, for example.
Well, it actually is a bit like that now, that you actually have to ask. They just make the button green, but you are...
They just have to change the colors, actually. If they make the color red, then everything's okay.
But I think, I was sort of, when you were saying this, reminded of Edward Snowden. I mean, we all know who he is, but how many of us have know someone who have begun sort of encrypting their messages after his revelations? Very few. I mean, I can think of a few people who were sort of genuinely surprised and who changed their behavior. But I think, but I don't think that sort of means that people don't care. Maybe they don't care so much because it doesn't affect them, but then they care about other things on the internet. And one thing that's highly debated in Danish media is another message. people care for things that are close to themselves. So one thing, for instance, is the notion of sharing, or the way that troubles us is not so much sort of what we share with large companies, but how what we share makes us vulnerable. For instance, there's a huge it's in court now, like these sort of hackers who have hacked young girls' accounts and then exposed them, made them vulnerable in public, sharing their information online or pictures online. And we care a lot about this. I think we care for the internet, but perhaps not in the ways that we are talking about now. We care for it in a more immediate way. And of course, you cannot. I think another lesson to learn here is that this technology, by definition, is promiscuous. I mean, you cannot have data without it leaking. It's leaky always, and that's so. If we don't want that, we don't want the technology. That's how it is. But we care for this in different ways, I think.
Antoine, you wanted to add something?
Yes, there's a great documentary about how it can affect us directly. It's called Nothing to Hide. It was published on Arte, like the Franco-German channel. It was quite good. I don't know if it's still available. No, I wanted to add, regarding how to educate people, like non-technical people, to technical stuff. I think it's obviously a necessity, but we won't all be developers tomorrow. We won't all have to develop or understand precisely. When we meet doctors, we are not experts in medicine, but we know the basics. When we meet architects, I guess it's the same. So we have to have this common understanding, but I don't know if anyone has to know precisely what are the different machine learning models, etc. So we're using metaphor just to make people enter this world, and after we use more details. But one of the things maybe we didn't talk was also the non-technical education of technical people. So it would mean I think every citizen has to get technical classes about the internet, but every developer, every people in this field has to get classes on ethics, on history, on literature, on politics. And it's something missing today. So we are doing some classes in engineering schools, usually in the last year, and they tell us we've never had a class that was not technical. That was, I don't know, in sociology or other fields. And those are the people building the tools we are all using now. Those are the people managing the biggest company on earth. So I guess it would be interesting too to get them to understand what they're building. And Victor and Brice seem to have understand quite well. We were yesterday taking some beers, and they really understand the political model, the economic model, the stakes. But a lot of developers, of entrepreneurs, are just building because they are seeing an economic opportunity, or because they want to develop a technical solution to a problem they don't really understand. And I think that's...
And this is also becoming, well, if you look at it historically, from the very long historical point of view, the development of knowledge is the development of specialization. And beforehand, in the Europe of the medieval era, when universities were first created, of course, there wasn't this strict difference between the different... You always had to do Latin, or you always had to read history when you were doing also law or something like this. It hung together in a different way. We were speaking earlier about this English historian who talked about the two cultures, the cultures of science and the culture of humanities, and they're becoming more separated. And I was thinking about this as pertains to artificial intelligence, which we touched upon just briefly before the pause. I mean, that's one of the places where it must be absolutely capital what you mean by intelligence. Because one notion of intelligence creates one application and another creates another. Or am I mistaken?
Can I answer? So about this, what is important to know about artificial intelligence is that most of the products we use that are called to be artificial intelligence are using a lot of workers, human workers, to moderate, to classify data. Okay? And that's why it's useful, in fact, to know the difference between several models of intelligence, of artificial intelligence, is to understand what is the real side of it, which is a really huge social side, in fact, because most of those workers are living in Africa or in Asia, or have really bad salaries. There is a researcher, Antonio Casilli, I don't know if you know him, he worked on those subjects, and it's really fascinating, in fact, to see that we use some products, and even on the social medias, in fact, those contents are not moderated by algorithm, but by human. And all days, those humans are seeing awful pictures that they choose to moderate, or sometimes they have to classify pictures to just feed a machine learning model, okay? Machine learning model needs to have classified data. So there are some automation, but there are also a lot of human work done today by bad paid workers. So there is this social side, which is also a kind of geopolitical side too. How we, as users, have a kind of domination and use of this digital slave, we could say, living in other countries. So this is really the meeting between our life, our digital metaphorical life, and the reality. And I wanted to just to come back to your question about the platform and business opportunity. In fact, just if we come back to the internet bubble, Google, Amazon, and later Facebook had to create a model. And they take as an example what Microsoft or IBM or Apple already made. So Microsoft has had, during the internet bubble, was already a leader in the operating system we all know, that is Windows, okay? And this was on Windows that Microsoft made all its expansion strategies, commercial strategies. Then, beginning by Windows, it could put tools. We are using Word, Excel, and all that. And today, for example, they added Teams also to make a video conference.
So a platform that can do everything.
Yes. And so Google, Amazon, and later Facebook thought about we have to make an ecosystem too. We can't progress, we can't do a new Windows because Microsoft has already all this. So, in fact, we will focus on the web and we will try to make something like a platform, something like what it was beginning to be a platform. Okay, it was not a platform at the beginning, but more and more to keep control and to centralize data, taking and treatment. Okay, so that's it, and that's the link. And today, Chinese companies are doing the same with Super App.
With what?
Maybe no. Super App, it's mobile apps. So it's the same. They thought, okay, we can go on the web. They are too big about this. Android, the OS mobile is Googled. So we have to create our own things. And they created Super App, that are big mobile application, that are kind of mobile platforms too, which created also big dependencies. Another chain of dependencies for China. So it is the same model. And it is always, of course, business opportunity, but to keep control and to be able to expand.
And it has a geopolitical side as well, as I imagine you would say. I just wanted to get back to this question of AI, because what you say there, that there's a there's the AI, there's a box, but there's a ghost in the box. Or as what was known early in the 20th century as a mechanical Turk.
Yes, that's Amazon Mechanical Turk.
Yes, a kind of chessboard that could move by itself, but really there was someone inside moving it. I wanted to ask you two, this question of AI and which intelligence is at play here. How do you see the development of AI? Which way is it going? Are we going to see what we are told will happen? Will it exist?
Regarding the development of AI, I don't know if we are the most relevant to give a point of view. But regarding the new kind of cyber attack vectors that will need less technical knowledge to perform side border effects on this kind of technology, we start discovering progressively new strategies that are really interesting. We have a few use cases we worked on last year. For instance, regarding big data. If you start playing on your own bank account, performing a deposit and withdrawing the same amount of money, and during this all days during 1 month long, you will start generating side border effects because we are building technologies that will blindly trust the big amount of money of data that is aggregated and treated in an automatic manner, and that will, at the end of the treatment chain, perform some actions that could lead to side border effects. For instance, we worked with Quant on their map feature, allowing people to discover very precisely what temperature was in each city, thanks to data that was aggregated and massively forwarded to them. By faking thermal sensors, we were able to create fake temperatures over countries or over regions because data was treated in an automatic and blindly manner. Today, big data is increasing, expanding quite fast. We are getting a focus on about how we automate the process of treating, being able to have very big storage capabilities, but the security variable is not considered. And regarding the AI, the process will be the same. How we can send big amounts of data with the technologies and the bandwidths and the computing technologies that can nowadays be reachable and at a low price, and how the incoming cyber vector, the cyber attack vectors will allow to bring to this system false data, erratic data that will lead to side border effects that we are not yet imagining completely.
And perhaps this is the time for us to, I had many more questions, obviously, but perhaps this is the time to bring the audience into the hall in a different way. Are there any questions from you? We've touched upon so many subjects. Yes?
Yes, I wanted to ask, we've been talking about technologies and how it impacts societies, and it's really, really nice, but I wanted also to hear your view on techno racism, because we have today, technology is not neutral. Technology is not objective. So, what do you think about that? Because if you look at AI, they are feed by black people, but still it's black. A lot of black people are imprisoned because of, they were looking like another black guy because AI is not sufficiently efficient in recognizing those faces. And today, for instance, if you go and Google beautiful, in Google, beautiful is white. You don't see black people beautiful. So what do you think about that?
Well, you're pointing exactly applied to social issues. What Brice stated regarding the input data. I think you're speaking about everything related to bias. So wherever it is applied to social sciences, hard sciences like math, whatever, and then how it applies to technology. First, we have to consider that with the growing complexity of technology, there's we can state that there is a less and less control on sometimes very fine-grained, fine-tuned technology, and therefore racial bias can get in and just results in the observable results that you just stated. For example, the Google. I think we might be referring to the Google photos categorizing 2 black teenagers as gorillas, or on everything related to racial ratios in American prisons.
The Nazi Twitter history too.
And yes, for example, on how artificial intelligence might become more and more mature and more available to the public. Will we see it in our lifetime, like fully accessible to the public? Well, there was a lot of experiments, on chatbots on the internet where people could talk with, the virtual reality bots. There was Microsoft who did this with, I don't know the name, Zoe or something like that. In less than 3 hours, the artificial intelligence started like chanting Nazi, World War II stuff. So it is indeed
the Nazi bot, the bot that was Nazified. You're talking about, yes.
Absolutely. So that's a big part of the issue. To me, it's a systemic issue with both security components, because the input data that you get and the way you design the system is both relying on human nature, and human nature is intrinsically vulnerable to this bias or to purely and simply human error, and that's how we live off these errors because. Well, that's how we hacked it. And as a citizen, you have the duty to also try to hack and find your way within these new technologies.
You wanted to add something, Christian?
No, I just think it's incredibly important that bringing up this topic and just saying briefly that you cannot imagine the development of computing without also connecting it to the history of colonialism. These two are intrinsically connected, and you see that even today. It has also been brought up today, like the development of statistics and the whole artificial intelligence. Of course, the Cambridge Analytica's algorithm was trained in a village in Kenya. So you have you have these issues coming up in very different ways all the time. But of course, it comes up in when we talk biases, and I just want to add that biases appear in different ways. They appear in the representation of data. I mean, of course, all doctors are white, because if the whole image set of doctors are white people, then doctors are white. So it has to do with representation in data, but it also has to do that even though you had all the data, all the images of doctors in the world, you'd still find that doctors were white because of the algorithm. Because if for an algorithm to work, it needs to filter things, and in those ways of filtering out, we reinforce existing biases and existing asymmetries of power and control. And then finally, you have the biases in the way you implement algorithms. For instance, if you had an algorithm that could in fact detect that a doctor could be of a different skin tone, then that would be great. So you have a good image search, but the same technology could also be applied in a different setting where it was for other reason crucial to detect or connect the skin tone of a person to, for instance, you can think of various surveillance systems and like that. So biases work on 3 levels: the data set, the algorithm, but also in the application. And I think we often forget that the problem of bias is not solved simply by representation in the data set. We have to constantly also think of how we implement the technologies and where and under what conditions.
Do you think artificial intelligence is intelligence or human intelligence? And if not, do you think artificial intelligence has the potential to be human intelligence?
I'll just repeat just if someone didn't hear it. So is artificial intelligence intelligent, or can it become human in a way?
Yeah, human intelligence.
Yeah.
I can try. So today, no. Really, technology is dumb. It's not clever. It just does what you tell him to do, and it will respond to reactions, to only what you. In fact, with the data sets you give him, and you can feed and try to make it learn something, okay, but it will never react like a human brain, okay. It can specialize on some points. For example, you can train. That's the word we use. You can train a model, IA model, with health data. So it is becoming a specialist about some data regarding a disease, for example, and it will be able to create new treatments, for example. But in the same time, you will not ask this product, because it's a product, at last, you will not ask this product to think as a human and to feel emotions, for example. It's really something, part of a dream today. Of course, when we love some movies and science fiction, we would like someday to see a robot maybe feeling emotions. But that's really not the reality today.
And so we really come back to some philosophical problems. Is intelligence corporal in a sense also, and so on. Maybe we have the time just for one last question. It seems otherwise we'll be closed in. Perhaps that's or two questions. Yes.
Kind of in relationship with that question, like in the life sciences, it seems like there's a broad consensus that we as humans are working computationally. I know it's not, it's another point of view than where you come from maybe, but it's they're actually looking at computers and how computers work and thinking we're working the same way. And maybe then building up in this question is more because what you could say computers, they cannot feel anything, they don't want anything. You put an input in and then you don't know it's the black box and there's something happening. But what do you think about this? Like if we look upon ourselves, not that I agree upon that, but perhaps life wants something. But I don't know.
I think Antoine, you wanted to.
Yeah, I just have just one question first. How do you say engrenage in English?
Steering.
Steering. No, it's just because you said like in life science we have like this consensus or this view of the human like a computer. So just to say that there is an echo. That 2 centuries ago we had the view as a human like engrenage. And probably it's the age of, it was the beginning of like this way to see the world, and now we are the age of information, so we see ourselves, or cybernetics made us see ourselves as just a flow of information, and probably in 50 years we'll see ourselves as behaving like quantum physics. So I think it's a reductionist way of seeing ourselves, and we are obviously much more than computers, and so to complete, I think artificial intelligence is a metaphor today, and I don't know if it will be much more than a metaphor in 50 years.
It's an interesting point. So artificial intelligence, it's not a thing; it's a metaphor.
We would have to define precisely what is intelligence, but today it's not by doing. It's doing really specific things really well, but it's not broad at all. And intelligence is the capacity to link.
Briefly. Yeah.
Yes, very briefly. Just about this, I think our perception of time has changed, and that digital technologies has accompanied this change. It's like the watch in the 17th century. That was the technology of this time, and digital, in fact, transformation also plays a role in our perception of time. There is a philosopher, German, Hartmut Rosser, which you would be interested by him.
Who speaks about acceleration and all of this.
Yes.
There's a question up there. Yes, you. Yeah.
I have a question for Antoine, just a bit more practical maybe, because I was very curious about your app and your, like, do you have a business model, or do you make money of it, or how does it work?
And can we invest?
Not yet. Yes, for a business model, we're mainly working with two fields. So one would be like a culture and tourism, and the other one is events. And so you can, we did, for instance, a partnership in Paris with Maison des Métallos, which is a cultural institution, and you could visit Belleville, a borough in Paris, and follow the lives of inhabitants. So it was more like a cultural project, but we have also projects, for instance, with Cézanne, which is a fashion brand, to open a pop-up store. So honestly, there are quite a lot of things. We just have to create projects that are anchored in a territory, so you have to go to a place to discover it, and which brings a surprise. So it's quite broad. And so it's mainly B2B. We don't take money from the users, it's from organizations. We have a small business model, but it's enough.
Good. Perhaps the last question, yes?
Yes, what if we instead narrow it to a physical thinking or cognition? So what would that say? Would the computer be able to then reach between no feelings and no between narrow to human cognition or thinking?
Christian?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'll just repeat what Ophélie said before, that computers are very good at specific things and superior to humans. But, if you talk cognition, it will understand the world in a very particular way that doesn't necessarily reflect the way you would understand the world. Within cognition theory, there's also, some people speculate that it's not me making sense of the world, that cognition, the way I make sense of the world, is actually something that happens in between us. It's somehow in the world, out there in relations, and perhaps a computer would have a hard time understanding these relations. But in other sort of specific things, like recognizing one thing, is this a cat or a dog, or it can be extremely more fast than a human being.
But there are some researchers focusing on this subject. There are some researchers really focusing on this subject of neural system. But it's just how mechanically, in fact, trying to imitate the neuronal system.
Okay, well, perhaps we'll end it there. Thank you very much for coming this evening, and thank you very much for the panel. And of course, thank you very much to l'Institut Français for having us.
Thank you. Thank you.